everyone, so today I'm going to be teaching you how to make 3 different fiber Christmas ornaments for your tree. So these are really simple. They're all using just a few different materials that you might have laying around your house. The first one is going to be this rainbow ornament using just some yarn. The second one is this tassel beaded ornament using some wooden beads and just some yarn again. And the third is this woven ornament using a little piece of driftwood, yarn, and a cardboard loom. So stay tuned and check out how to make all 3 of these fiber themed ornaments to make your tree extra textural this holiday season. Enjoy! Okay, so this first tutorial is going to be for a small rainbow ornament. It's all made with yarn, and you just need a few different things to get started. First is going to be yarn that goes on the inside of the rainbow, and then you'll need a couple different yarn colors for the outside of the rainbow. I usually just do 3 different rows for these small fiber rainbows. You'll need a pair of scissors, a comb or a fork will be helpful, and then I like to have a tapestry needle and a sewing needle on hand. I also have some thin thread that I'm using, and that's going to tie it all together. So if you have these things, then that would be great. I also sell a kit for these in my online shop, so I'm going to show you how to do it using my kit, but otherwise these are just the materials that you'll need. So the kit comes with everything pre-cut and measured. I usually use about 3.5 yards of each color. So it comes with 3.5 yards of each color, and then it comes with the inside string already cut, and then the thread. So if you're not using the kit, I would just measure out your inside yarn using a book. The quickest way to do this is just by wrapping around the tail end of your yarn. Wrap it around your book however many times you want, and then I usually just cut it in half at one end and in half at the other end so that I have these short measurements. And this inside yarn is about, I don't know, 7 inches long, but you can make it however long you want. So the first step is just to divide this yarn into 3 sections. And it's okay if not all of the pieces are exactly the same length, because you'll be cutting this at the end anyways to match all the fringe. Just get it approximately the same length. Alright, and then you can decide which color you want on the outside and what the layout is. So I'm going to start with my outside yarn and just unravel the end of that. And then about 1.5 inches in from the end, I'm going to tie this yarn around this group of fringe. And just tie a little simple double knot. And then this process is super simple and really repetitive, and all you're going to do is make sure that this tail is tucked and then wrap the yarn around and just do it tightly so that you don't see any of the inside fringe and all you're seeing is this top color. And I usually just like to do that by holding my pointer finger and my thumb tightly around and then just wrapping it around. And you can make this inside fringe a little bit thinner if you want the rainbow to be thinner. It's pretty customizable. And then as you're going, you can kind of start working it into that arch shape. So it's creating this very stiff piece that you can kind of shape and round. All right, and now that I've gotten to the other side where it's about even with the amount of fringe that I have out here, I am going to cut a small tail at the end, and I'm just going to wrap that around and loop it through. So I'm just looping that through, pulling it tight, and then doing that 1 or 2 more times just to make sure it's really secure. And this is where that tapestry needle is gonna come in handy. So then I take the end of the yarn, weave that through my tapestry needle, and then I just tuck that back up through the piece. This will make sure that it's extra secure and it's not gonna come apart. So pull that through, and then you can just cut that end all the way off. So now you have the outside layer of your rainbow. Then you just repeat that same process with the next 2 layers. Now that you have all 3 rows complete, just line those up and get them into the shape that you want. And now you're going to take your thread and your sewing needle and sew a zigzag all the way across to attach all 3 rows together. And you don't need much, it's only going to take a couple passes across to get this to be all connected. So I like to start on the second row just to tuck in my tail where the knot is going to be tied off. So I like to tie a knot off on the opposite end of where my needle is. And this is just, again, going to make sure that everything stays secure. So I'm just tying a little double knot here. And then with my needle, going to go through the bottom, straight across, through both rows. And then I'm going to pull that all the way through. And now I'm going to place my last row in and go straight across, attaching that one. Then it's as simple as just zigzagging all the way across. This doesn't have to be perfect or measured or anything like that. The point is just to get it to be sewn across. And this is a nice way of hiding that thread so that you everything looks really smoothly connected. If you don't want to sew it, you could easily hot glue these together as well. And I'm kind of just constantly shaping it because this is going to be my final shape. All right, now that I'm completely on the other side, I'm just going to go straight across one more time. And then I'm going to go back just across 2 of them. And now that I'm back here, I'm just going to kind of loop on this back side a couple of times and just create a few double knots through itself. Cut off that end, and then you can also cut off the end of the tail that you had before. And then flip it over, and there's your front, which is going to be a little bit cleaner than the back side. Now you can make a little loop that goes at the top to hang on your tree. These are also perfect to hang in your car or on a wall or something like that. I'm making a pretty big loop. If you are planning on hanging this in a rear view mirror, just make that big enough to be able to fit around that. And then I'm just gonna cut off a little bit, and I'm going to weave this straight down the middle, just taking both of these ends straight down the middle so that I have this loop at the top. And just kind of poking that through. Oops. And then I just tie a knot around this back side so you can't see it from the front. And just tie another double knot. And then you can trim off that tail. And that completes the loop at the top. And then the last step is just going to be to brush out all the fringe at the bottom and just cut it so that it's all even. So I'm just going to take that and kind of cut straight across. You can do this at an angle or at a curve. Doesn't have to be perfect. This one is really thick. So the fringe at the bottom is really floofy. Obviously, if you do a thinner one, then that fringe is going to be a little bit more straight. But I think this is cute. It looks like clouds at the bottom. So yeah, that's your rainbow. Another option you can do is hot glue a bead on top. And I think that looks nice and finished as well. Or, you know, you could just tie a bead on the top by weaving in the end of your string. And then you could just, you know, loop that around and make a little knot. And there you go. There is the first ornament. Just this cute little fiber rainbow. And it's gonna look really cute on your tree. So, moving on to the next project. For this next project, we're going to be making a simple beaded tassel ornament. So this is really simple. All you need is a few wooden beads or any beads that you have, and then a little bit of yarn. I'm using this cream yarn. You can use any yarn that you have. So first, I'm going to take a book. This is just a small book, and I'm going to find the end of my yarn. And I'm just going to wrap around a bunch of times until I have the thickness or the amount of a tassel that I want. I like my tassels to be nice and full, so I usually go quite a few times. I'm also going to be cutting on both sides, so the actual length of the tassel is going to be half of this book measurement. So you can set your book aside. And I'm just cutting to the length. So the length that you cut to, you're going to actually fold that in half. So however long you want your tassel, just make sure you double that when it comes to cutting the yarn. So I'm going to take my chunk of yarn and I'm going to cut another piece of yarn. And I'm going to make this extra long because I'm going to string all of the beads through this yarn. This is about 48 inches. You probably don't need it that long, but again, I'm going to fold it in half and just meet up the tail ends so that there is a loop at the top. And this is just going to make it so you have a nice finished top to hang your ornament on. So I have my loop at the top. I am going to create a knot at the length that all of my beads are going to take up. So all my beads are going to go above this knot. Then I'm going to split that knot, the two tail ends, in half and wrap that around the center of my tassel. And then just make sure you do a double knot to secure that. And then you can just let those ends hang down and we'll cut them later. So a brush or a comb might come in handy here again. And I like to just brush out this tassel and make sure everything is even. Be careful here because they're not super secure, so these little tassel pieces can each pull out individually. And now you're going to take either the same color of yarn or you can do an accent color of yarn, which is going to wrap around the top of your tassel to secure it. So I'm using this gold color and it's just a thin thread. And I'm just going to start by having a tail of this color down at the bottom and then just hold that in place and wrap around your tassel. And you're going to want this relatively tight just to make sure everything is secure. And you can decide how thick you want this band to be. Okay, and then just cut off a tail. And again, we're going to use the same method as we did before of just, pulling that through a loop to tie it off. And then if you want, you can also knot the two tails together. Just create a double knot with those. And then take a tapestry needle or a sewing needle, and weave those ends back through. That's just going to tuck them in and make sure that you can't see them. So I'm just tucking both ends into my tapestry needle and pulling through. And then cut that off. Now you're going to take all your beads, I'm just going to trim off that. So you're going to take all your beads and lay them out on top of this tassel. I find it easy to use a tapestry needle to weave through the beads, but you don't have to. So I'm just using this assortment of wooden beads. That tapestry needle does not fit through that bead. There's no order that I'm really doing this in. Just doing a little variation. Okay, once you have your layout, then just tie a double knot at the top. Just make sure that it's snug against the bead. And then you can take your brush and brush out your tassel. And then I like to just kind of, go around, brush it all out, and then sort of hold it tightly toward the bottom to get a nice even cut across. And you can kind of twist it around to make sure that all the tassel pieces are even. And there you have it, your really cute, simple wooden bead tassel ornament. Okay, for this third and final DIY fiber ornament, we are going to make a small weaving ornament using a cardboard loom. So this is actually how I learned how to weave, was on a little DIY loom made of cardboard. And it's super easy and really fun and a nice way to learn the basics of weaving. So you're going to need a small piece of cardboard, a tapestry needle, a pair of scissors, and then a few different yarn choices. I'm using a little variety of textures and colors here just to switch it up. So first begin by taking your piece of cardboard. Mine is about 3.5 inches by 4.25 inches. It doesn't matter how big this is, however big it is how big your weaving can be. So all we're going to do is make marks across the cardboard that are 1/4 inch apart. And you're going to do this at the top and the bottom. Now take your scissors and make small cuts at each of your markings. Repeat that on the other side. Okay, so these are all your slits. Then you're going to take a thin yarn and make your warp. So I'm just using this thin cotton twine. You can use pretty much any yarn that you want, but just make sure that it's sturdy enough to hold a little bit of tension. So I'm just using this test that makes sure that it's not going to pull apart. Now tuck that tail into one of the slits, the top left slit, and then you're going to go through the bottom left slit, straight down, around the space between those slits, and then back up. And just do this all the way across. So I'm going up, around the back, across this little point, back down, and then around. And I'm going to stop here because I think that's a nice width for my weaving. Then just cut off a little tail at the end, and you can just leave that. So to begin, we're going to use a technique called the tabby weave, and that is the most basic form of weaving, and it's just going over and under every other warp thread. And what we're doing is creating a weft. So the weft is the horizontal yarn and the warp is the vertical yarn. And I'm just going to do a couple of rows of that. And I'm starting out by tying a knot onto the bottom left side. Using a tapestry needle will be the best here to get in between the cardboard. Also, make sure that each of the ends are going to stay tight because you want a little bit of tension. If you need to tie this off onto itself, feel free to do that. It's just going to depend kind of how sturdy your cardboard is, whether or not it's tight enough. But just make sure that it is tight so it doesn't come apart. Okay, now that I have my tail, I'm just going to tuck that toward the bottom. Then I'm going to take the other tail, weave that back through the tapestry needle, and simply go under and over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under, all the way across. now that I've gone across, make sure that you don't pull super tight because that's going to create this warp effect around your edges. So to have nice straight edges, you want to make sure that there's enough slack in the yarn. So a great technique to make sure is by using this bubble technique, where you just create this simple arch shape and then push that down in the middle and on the edges. And that's just going to make sure that there's enough yarn to sit in between all of this warp. Then you're going to repeat going the opposite direction. So this time, make sure that you go over the last string, under, over, under, over, under. And repeat that going all the way across. You may have to use your fingers to help you adjust because the cardboard is thin. Well, it might get in the way a little bit. So again, just make sure that you're not pulling super tight here in the end. Make your shape, your arch shape, and press that down. Then you can repeat going the opposite way. And that's the simple tabby weave. And you just repeat this over and over again to create the structure of your weaving. Once you have it all woven in, tuck in the end of your tail by just going back the opposite direction and then tucking the rest in behind. This is just going to make sure that it's nice and locked in. Then when you start the next row, you are going to weave that tail in on the opposite of this little section where you wove the tail in before, and then repeat going across. Just always make sure that you aren't skipping warp yarns and you're always going every other under and over one. If you mess up, you'll notice because when you go back over, it'll be that you just had gone over the row before. So just make sure that you can see that you're going over the opposite one that you went before. Hopefully that makes sense. It's not too complicated, but yeah, the simple technique is just going over and under every other one. You can apply this same technique and use larger cardboard and make really cute woven coasters. That would be a really great DIY gift idea. So I'm just doing a simple striped ornament, and I thought it would be nice to add a big tassel right in the center. So this is a technique of how you can add fringe to your weavings. You can use the same technique anywhere on this piece, and you can do it on smaller scales, so you could have fringe coming from the bottom as well. So I'm just gonna measure out a bunch of string. I'm gonna use just a book here to wrap around. Weaving is super flexible, so you can really use any materials that you have laying around, any scrap yarn. You can add wooden beads, you could add lots of different things to customize it and really make it your own. So I'm just going to decide how long I want this to be. I think I'm going to go a little shorter with it. I'm just going to cut this in half. And now I'm going to take all tail ends of one side and find the middle point. So these two are my middle point. So I'm going to wrap all of them around and underneath this middle warp. and pull that down. And then I'm going to take the opposite side and wrap around and under the warp right next to it, but going around the right side. So both tails are going to meet in the center, and I'm just going to pull that down. And it's pretty messy right now, so you can just kind of find what yarns and strings are out of place and pull those out, or just pull them down to make them tighter. I'm just pulling them out to make it a little thinner and easier. And that is called a raya knot. And it's the same technique that I use in all my weavings to add fringe. So I'm just doing one simple knot in the center. And then you can just repeat and weave right over that. I do have a more in-depth tutorial series about this on my Etsy shop. It's a full beginner series learning the fundamentals of weaving. I teach how to use a frame loom and create woven wall hangings on a larger scale. It teaches the tabby weave technique, it teaches other textural techniques, and gives a more in-depth look into how to lay fringe and create a full woven piece. So check that out if you're interested in weaving. So once you reach your final row, which you could keep going up to the top if you want, just tie off a knot onto the edge warp, just like you did to start out. And then you will need a stick or a piece of dowel or something to hang this from. So I'm just going to use this little piece of driftwood that I had. Then to remove it from the loom, just pull off all of the strings at the top first, one at a time, and tie all of these ends, well, cut them first and then tie them all into a knot to secure the top. Don't pull down too hard or you're going to squish the weaving, but just tie it into a double knot. For the first and last sides, you will have 3 pieces of yarn to work with, so just tie all 3. These ornaments are on a pretty small scale of weaving, so it can be a little tricky to get all those knots tied. So then to pull off the bottom, you simply can just pull those loops off, and the weaving will stay in place. And there's your little mini weaving. So to finish this off, you can cut and trim any fringe that you have. And then you can cut and tuck in these tails just to make a really nice, clean, finished look. So take your tapestry needle and just tuck in these tails into the back side of the weaving by just weaving them through a couple of rows of the weft. And then you can just pull that through and trim it. And then as far as this top section goes, you can also tuck all of these tails in so you have a nice clean finished line, or you can just trim them off and you might see a little bit of the tail, but that's okay. All right, now the last step is just attaching it onto your driftwood piece. So I'm just going to be using the same string that I used for the warp, so the same cotton twine. Just measure out a little bit of that and use your tapestry needle and tuck in the tail, and then just center it wherever you want it to hang on this little driftwood piece, and go through the first knot, pull that tail through, and then you're just going to wrap that around the driftwood and create another double knot and then just tuck that tail into the back. Take the opposite end of your string, and then you're gonna go around the back and then around the driftwood and through the front of the next knot, and then back around. Basically, you're just sewing it onto the driftwood. And then just go back around the last one more time just to make sure it's secure. And then I like to just wrap it around, weave it through the loop, and then use this remaining yarn to use as your little hanger. So just measure out how far you want it to hang, and then just hold that in place on the front, wrap it around a couple of times, and then tie it back onto itself at the top using a double knot. Then I like to just flip that over, tie it again, and then I usually tie it to the original tail of the yarn using another double knot, and this will make sure that it'll stay all in place. Trim that, and there you have it, your own DIY weaving ornament. Super cute little way to get a little fiber art onto your tree. So there are all 3 fiber art ornaments, and I hope that you enjoy this tutorial, and let me know in the comments below if you decide to make some of these yourself or if you have any questions. Stay tuned for more videos like this in the future, and let me know if you want to see anything else. Thanks for watching. Bye.